Right. Hello, everyone, and good afternoon. Welcome to our second live stream of a series of live streams by Clio no Brasil. My name is Raul Paraná, and I am currently the coordinator of this brand new initiative. And I'm very happy to be here with all of you today in this beautiful afternoon. I would like to start by saying I'm sorry. Unfortunately, we've had technical issues that were beyond our control, and we just couldn't figure out what was happening. But luckily, here we are. We were able to figure it all out, and we will then have our live stream as planned from now until about 1 p.m. We will try not to go past the original time scheduled, just out of respect, to your time and also to our guests' times. As I mentioned before, this is the second live stream in a series. 2 weeks ago, we had the very first one on teacher education. We had David Marsh and Antonieta Megali as guest speakers. And today we have our second stream titled Can Bilingual Education Be for All? And we are welcoming two wonderful, very special guests, Dr. Erika Cotrin. Hi, Erika.
Hi, good afternoon. Thanks for the invitation. It's a pleasure to be here with you.
Thank you, Erika. It's our pleasure. And we're also welcoming Dr. Maria Luisa Perez Cañado. Hi, Marisa.
Hi, Raul. Great to be with you all today.
Thank you for being with us. Just out of habit, I want to call you Marisa all the time, right? And then I have to remember Maria Luisa. Both of them will be talking about the same topic on bilingual education, elitism, and equity, which is a very relevant topic for our context here in Brazil. While in many different countries, bilingual education may be accessible to many, if not all, in other countries, it's usually the education for the minority groups, such as, for example, immigrants and refugees. That is not the case, however, in Brazil. What we do have in Brazil is a very elitist situation in which bilingual education, and especially prestige languages bilingual education, is only offered to those who can afford to pay very, very expensive tuition in private schools. And very recently here in Brazil, we had a milestone release, which was the national guidelines for the offer of plurilingual education. And with that new document that just came out about a month ago, a lot of very heated debate has started. And with that debate, there's been concerns about whether it's ever going to be possible for us to start implementing bilingual education, and more specifically, prestige languages bilingual education in public schools. Public school teachers want to know, private school teachers want to know, administrators want to know, is it possible? And this is why we have invited our two guests. First, Dr. Erika Cotrin will be speaking for about 12 minutes on this topic, presenting the Brazilian perspective, speaking a little bit about this document, which has been published. And then after that, Dr. Maria Luisa Perez Cañado is going to speak about the same topic, sharing her international perspective, having come from Spain, a country which has already experienced what we are experiencing now, a very elitist, right, a situation, a very elitist offer of bilingual education, and has now completely changed, right? So to get started, I'd like to open the floor to Erika Cotrin, who is not only a wonderful friend, but also a very, very competent professor, currently a postdoc at Hanover University and a doctor in education from the University of São Paulo. Erika, whenever you're ready, the floor is yours.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you so much. Thanks so much, everybody, for your audience. So let me share my screen with you to start, this conversation, this presentation. So let's go there. Second, let me do this differently. Okay. So I will share my screen with you. I think you can see already, right? Yeah? Okay, great. So, uh, can CLIO be for all? The answer to this question is yes, CLIO can be for all. Because CLIO aggregates multiculturality, differentiation, language development, competencies development, and consequently can encompass educational parameters. But I would like to add further questions to it. Can bilingual education be considered as a right for Brazilian students? How can CLIO provide instruments to make bilingual education possible for all students, avoiding one more educational process that increases the distance between poor and rich, and benefits a small group of students and ignores the huge diversity that we have in the country in linguistic, cultural, social, and economic aspects? Here, I will raise more questions than provide answers. But I strongly believe and expect to demonstrate that CLIO can be an interesting way to make bilingual education possible for all through its innumerable research and profound fundamentals. I would like to start this discussion, this talk, with a statement of Desmond Tutu. Desmond Tutu is, is one of the most human rights activists alive. He won the Nobel Peace Prize for his contributions against apartheid in South Africa. And he said that if you are neutral in situations of injustice, you have chosen the side of the oppressor. So this statement is connected to one Paulo Freire statement. He said that there's no impartiality. Everyone has an ideological view and some ideological basis. So the question is, what is your basis? Is your basis inclusive or exclusionary? What's the base of bilingual education in Brazil will look like, will be? So when do you think about bilingual education in Brazil, what comes to your mind? Public education or private education? So if you take a second, one single second to reflect about it, I think most of you will get the answer very easily. But there are other issues that we can connect to the previous statement on education and bilingual education as a right, and to make it work exactly like that, effectively and democratically. How will we deal with the different levels on the second language of instruction to guarantee equitable practices? What is the professional training that the teachers will get, the ones who are already working and the new ones that will come? How multiculturality will be integrated in the process, considering all the context, Brazilian context? How will we include students with special needs in the bilingual education context to guarantee equity? And how we will integrate asylum seekers that are mainly in public schools in Brazil. Only in 2019, the country welcomed, we can say that, 80,000 people who asked for permission to live here legally, to get the refugee status. Despite of all these challenges, English is the only language supported by BNCC, the Brazilian Common Core. But as a foreign language and from grade 6, from 6th grade only. There is no mention about bilingual education. The parameters in the document indicates elementary knowledge with foreign language goals. So this complex scenario of bilingual education in Brazil demanded the development of policies, of national guidelines to roll bilingual education that was already happening in some way here. But with some examples, but good examples, bilingual education is mainly in private sector. and until now without specific regulation. So this new document considers the European framework of reference for languages to analyze the language development of students, and requires that 80% of lower school students achieve A2 proficiency level in the second language of instruction when they finish this phase. 80% of middle school students achieve B1 level in the second language of instruction. And 80% achieve B2 level. So are we talking about foreign language acquisition only? Or we are talking about bilingual education in all its depthness? How about the students who will not be able to achieve these results? Who did not have the chance to develop the second language properly due to various issues, linguistic, social, economic, among others, consider the public education? How about the contents that will be taught exclusively in the second language while the students acquire the language of instructions? And the teachers, their training, their fluency in the second language of instruction. I have to remind you that in 2019, one research developed by the British Council showed that in Brazil, only 5% of the population speaks English fluently. This is the situation of English language only. That's a lingua franca. In a country that has the highest number of language schools in the whole world. And how about the other language that can be instructed in bilingual education? German, Spanish, whatever. So there are so many possibilities. Given the situation, I have to go back to the statements in the first slides of this presentation to say that bilingual education for all in today's context is a right, according to our Constitution in Article 206. The point is that I just showed you that not all Brazilian students have the same condition to learn, to share thoughts and knowledge in bilingual education due to many factors. Not all teachers in Brazil have the same condition to teach, to research, to share thoughts, arts, and knowledge, as the Constitution just mentions. All students have the right to share their thoughts and have access to various information through communication tools to be provided through education. How can we think a democratic education without diverse language resources? CLIO is one of the ways to develop those resources in bilingual education and for all. So, a democratic project for bilingual education in Brazil must take the following aspects, some of these aspects into consideration that we'll mention here. Technological tools for teaching and learning in bilingual education. Specific higher education curricula for bilingual education, besides the extension and post-graduation courses that the guidelines already require. Investment in research and implementation of techniques for bilingual education in a multicultural context, such as CLIO. Teacher training programs for the teachers who are already active at schools and will start the implementation of the program. And extremely serious, important diagnostic analysis to evaluate the scenario and follow the implementation process of the program. Until now, we have only goals, we have objectives only. But first, we have to understand through data where we really are before defining goals. This is so clear. And translanguaging practices to allow the students participate in the classes with equality, putting their thoughts, ideas, questions on the table, despite of their level in the second language of instruction that will consequently develop if the mentioned elements are implemented with criteria and seriously. In 21st century educational context, plurilingual, bilingual education should not be barely a possibility, but a right for all students. All Brazilian students have the right to access multi-source ideas and knowledge despite of demographic or social or economic barriers. And they have also the right to be listened by everyone. People have the right to understand Brazilian's complexity, and not only from the voice from academics, but from the voice of students, from the voice of teachers. So I understand bilingual education as a right to avoid that only privileged voices are listened. Brazil is too complex. Brazil is so great and various, so diverse. We have to offer bilingual education as a way to let people speak to the world. So thanks for your attention. That's it for now.
Thank you, Erika, for your fresh perspective on actually whether it's currently considered a right here in Brazil, right? Whether bilingual education is considered a right. That was very interesting, and I really appreciate your sharing your knowledge with us. So thank you. Now, next up, we will have Dr. Maria Luisa Perez Cañado, who, in addition to being a wonderful, wonderful friend and a wonderful scholar as well, is currently leading two very interesting projects. The first one, a European project called ADIBE, right? Attention to Diversity in Bilingual Education. And the second one, a fantastic master's program from the Universidade de Jaén, which is a partner university of our program, CLIL no Brasil, and she currently coordinates the master's program in bilingual education and CLIL. Right, so without further ado, thank you so much, Marisa, and take it away when you're ready.
Thank you so much, Raul. I'm also going to share my screen, make sure that you can all see it. And I would like to begin my presentation, of course, by expressing a huge thank you to the organizers, to CLIL no Brasil, to Professor Raul Paraná for the invitation to be with you all today. It's an honor for me to be participating, and I have to say, especially considering that Brazil is very near and dear to my heart ever since I was a visiting professor at UFBA. So thank you so very much for having me, and I'm delighted to be discussing with you all such a hot topic right now on the CLIL agenda, like elitism and inclusion and segregation in bilingual education, on which I would like to offer you today the European/Spanish perspective, because in Spain, we've been focusing on CLIL for practically 2 decades now. And in fact, Spain is considered to be like a representative microcosm of CLIL approaches. And I think it's safe to say that in our country right now, bilingual education is pretty much an unstoppable train, which is where I actually think you guys in Brazil are going with these curricular guidelines that Erika has talked about. So we have to do whatever it takes to make sure that that metaphorical train stays on track and we allow its passengers to reach their destination safely. And I gotta say that one of the issues that has been most hotly debated and which has actually threatened to derail that train is the whole question of elitism in CLIL. And here in Spain, you know, arguments have been tossed back and forth. I bring you here quotes from different journals and from different social media and newspaper articles where they say that, you know, bilingual education in our context is an elitist nightmare. And there's a brutal classism in CLIL programs. Now, is this true? This is basically the overarching question I would like to answer for you today by canvassing the past, present, and future of this issue in our context. So I'm going to start out by talking you through the past of CLIL programs in terms of elitism in Spain, to see how they were at the very beginning. And then I'll share with you what the story is right now, that we have 20 years of experience. And I'll also be mapping out future pathways for progression and extracting for you the main takeaways, primarily so that you don't make the same mistakes we have and you learn from our lessons, which have basically been through trial and error, okay? Now, those of you who know me know that I do not believe in opinions or in isolated cases. I believe, guys, in hardcore empirical evidence. And that's what I'm going to be bringing you today, okay? Evidence from the latest solid empirical studies, especially those conducted in monolingual contexts in Spain, because I think that mirrors the situation that you guys have in Brazil, okay? So, what did this all look like at the very beginning, back in the 1990s when we were starting out with CLIL programs? Was CLIL elitist at the very beginning back then? Well, if we look at the evidence, people, I think the answer to this question would lean towards a big, fat yes. There was elitism, and I think not only in Spain, also across Europe, because there was overt streaming of children. If they wanted to partake in a bilingual program, they had to accredit a certain knowledge in the subject, a certain language level, or both. And in countries like Spain, where there were no admission criteria, there was covert streaming through what Lorenzo et al. Have termed self-selection, which was bolstered by social class and parental choice. So we basically had coexisting CLIL and non-CLIL classes in the same schools. And guess where the best students went? Yep, you're right, into the CLIL stream, right? The most intelligent, the most motivated, the most linguistically proficient, the students with a higher socioeconomic status, they would go into the CLIL group. So our situation at the beginning did not paint a very pretty picture in terms of elitism. What's the story now, though? Now that we have 20 years or even more of implementation of CLIL programs, is CLIL still elitist? Well, now, thanks to the evidence base we have, I think in order to answer this question, we actually have to break it down into 3 sub-questions. First, are the best learners still in the CLIL groups? Secondly, what's the effect of crucial variables like rural-urban context, socioeconomic status, or private-public school on the learning competence? And finally, can CLIL work even in the most vulnerable, underserved, disenfranchised settings? We now have the research to answer these questions, so let's do so. Let's begin with the first one. Are the best learners still in the CLIL groups? We now have a solid evidence base that allows us to answer this query, and these studies have compared CLIL and non-CLIL students in hundreds of random schools in terms of verbal intelligence, 4 factors of motivation, and English level, and look at this. No statistically significant differences have transpired. So the broader takeaway here is that the best learners are no longer in the CLIL groups. With time of CLIL implementation, the bilingual and non-bilingual learners are increasingly homogeneous, or to say the same thing, the bilingual learners are now more heterogeneous. Not only the best ones are in those groups, everyone is accessing them. What about the effect of these crucial variables that I was mentioning before? What kind of role do they play? Again, a series of studies have focused on this, and they've compared the performance of bilingual and non-bilingual students in rural-urban setting, socioeconomic status, and different types of school. And the best learners have been found to be in urban schools with a high socioeconomic status and in a private setting. Surprise, surprise, right? Well, let me tell you, there is a surprise, because this has appeared for the non-bilingual learners. But in bilingual schools, CLIL programs have been found to cancel out those differences. So the lesson learned here is that CLIL is acting as a leveler across these settings, which is wonderful news. And this is not a one-off. It's actually a pattern that is emerging in repeated studies that are being replicated, and which is very hopeful. So we need to keep our eye on it. And if you want, we can delve deeper in the Q&A session into why this is happening. And third, can CLIL work even in the most disenfranchised settings? For example, in a rural school, in a public setting with minority groups like gypsy ethnicities here in Spain, with parents that have a very low social, cultural, and social educational level. This was the case of this school that you have on screen, El IES Montes Orientales, which is in Isnayoz, a small town in the province of Granada in the south of Spain, where I live, and where we went to carry out a study comparing perfectly homogeneous CLIL and non-CLIL students. And look at the results. The CLIL learners were better across the board, and CLIL was working magnificently in this context. I was in fact blown away by these kids. They were speaking English in the hallways, following classes, biology classes 100% in English, carrying out extremely complex project-based work in English. In fact, when I was approached by Historias de Luz to record a short documentary on our project, and they said, Marisa, where do you want to tape this? I said, in Isnayoz, so that everybody can see that these children who would otherwise never have had the opportunity to learn bilingually are thriving in a CLIL scenario. So absolutely, CLIL can work in these disenfranchised settings. In fact, the broader takeaway here is that CLIL is offering everyone what was previously reserved for the elites. So now, if you had to answer that overarching question, is CLIL elitist right now in Spain? I think the answer would definitely lean towards a no. But what's going to happen in the future, people? Because I have to say, now in Spain, we are mainstreaming CLIL. We no longer have coexisting CLIL and non-CLIL branches in a school. The entire school is bilingual. So will this across the board implementation jeopardize the success of CLIL policy? Well, the answer to this question right now is we don't know. Okay, we really don't know yet because we don't have enough research, and the teachers who have been polled have pretty much answered in a 50-50 kind of way. Like 50% of the teachers would say, yeah, we can do this. We can cater for diversity because of the student-centeredness inherent in CLIL. But an equally sizable proportion has said, no way, are you kidding me? This is going to fatally undermine everything that we have achieved so far. But you know what? Let's not be so negative. I think actually the answer to this question can at this point be qualified to we're starting to know, thanks to this ADIBE project that Raul has mentioned, because we're carrying out, in fact, not one, but 4 different projects within the ADIBE umbrella with thousands of parents, teachers, and students in 6 European countries, including Spain. And we can now have some, broader takeaways from the initial data. First of all, we found that indeed mainstreaming CLIL is not only a huge challenge, it's an increased difficulty. Why? Well, first, because right now we lack a clear-cut theoretical framework on inclusion. We don't really know what diversity, inclusion, differentiation, integration entail, and they need to transcend mere special education needs. Secondly, there's a conspicuous lack of materials to cater for diversity, for different types of learners. And teachers are often daunted by the challenge of having to find, adapt, or create their own. This dovetails also with very vague pedagogical and evaluation strategies that we now have to accommodate inclusion. And there are also very, very high teacher training needs across the board. And finally, teachers right now, according to our results, are not really satisfied with the multi-tiered support system they have from families, from the school in terms of multi-professional teams, or from the authorities, especially in terms of teacher-student ratios, time to coordinate with other colleagues, and the support of language assistance. So we have our work cut out for us, okay? We have to re-engineer, rethink the entire system in order to ensure that CLIL works in a mainstreaming kind of situation, right? But hey, we're not here to dwell on the challenges. We're here to offer solutions, right? So hey, what are we doing about all this? Well, through ADIBE, we're already acting upon 6 main fronts that I wanted to share with you. First, we have just finished designing that theoretical framework that I was mentioning we needed. We've called it, people, the DD framework, because we capitalize on diversity, inclusion, differentiation, and integration. And we not only include special needs, we also go beyond that to cover styles and levels and paces and backgrounds. Secondly, quantitatively, we are determining whether CLIL can truly work for all. And we're focusing on the impact which these programs have on 3 tiers of learners in terms of the variables that you have on screen. From a qualitative perspective, we're also designing and validating a set of questionnaires, interview, and observation protocols to identify the main difficulties, best practices, and chief teacher training needs. And these will feed into an app which will allow teachers to take a personalized diagnosis of their main training needs for diversity, and they will be redirected to an original batch of materials that we have also designed with 3 types of differentiation and with an interdisciplinary nature, because they work in the L1, the L2, and 3 different content subjects. The guidelines manual accompanying those materials has also laid out a clear-cut set of pedagogical and assessment tips to cater for diversity in CLIL, and I'll be happy to share those with you if you're interested in the Q&A session. And finally, we have set in place a teacher training course with a 3-pronged structure to guide teachers from more controlled to freer practice until they can design their own activities to cater for diversity. So all of this that I've mentioned is going to be made available freely online through our webpage at dbitproject.com and social media. So stay tuned, because lots of materials are going to be coming your way really soon. Right, so on the basis of this historical overview that I've tried to share with you on elitism in Spain, I think we can extract 3 main takeaways. First, as Bob Dylan would put it, the times they are a-changin'. The elitism, the self-selection, which was increasingly operative in CLIL in our context, is now increasingly obsolete. And this leads us to the second takeaway. The whole issue of elitism in CLIL in our context after 20 years could actually be on its way out from being a burning issue to becoming a non-issue on the CLIL agenda. In fact, in an article I've just written, it's been published like days ago on what's hot and what's not on the current CLIL agenda, I contend that we should stop harping on this issue of elitism and segregation and shift our focus to setting in place measures to cater for diversity and ensure that CLIL can be accessible for all types of learners. And finally, don't forget, people, this takes time and this takes research. It's taken us 20 years to get here, okay? You're just starting out. So we have to be patient, and we need to make sure that it's not opinions, but research that we use as a compass to make decisions. As Marsh has recently put it, innovation cannot be based on assumption. So we should just, stop harping on the same issues. And like the Nike motto says, just do it, get on with it, continue researching to offer real data. And that's where you'll find us in the next few years doing it, continuing to research into how to cater for diversity in CLIL in order to ensure that that metaphorical train stays on track and we can truly ensure that CLIL, bilingual education, can be for all. So thank you so much. Muito obrigada for your attention, and I remain at your entire disposal for any questions in the next few minutes. Thank you.
Thank you, Marisa, for your wonderful, wonderful talk. I really like the message that you just sent us, that you tried to convey at the end, and actually that you've conveyed beautifully. First of all, empirical research is much needed, right? And we do have to consider that we are, I would not necessarily say behind, because it's not a race, but we are not in the same stage as Spain, and we can definitely look to the Spanish case, right, to learn from it and already do perhaps a better job right from the get-go. right? So we can take inspiration from this. Here in Brazil, many people may think, for example, that it's not possible to implement bilingual education in the public sector. And sure, sure enough, challenges abound. But at the same time, there aren't many public schools currently implementing bilingual education. So we can't really say that we've tried, right? And we haven't also done much research. So there's a big field there, right, to explore. We should and we could perhaps start looking to implement bilingual education in public schools and researching how those programs are working. Now, we will take questions from the audience, and we have a few questions. Prior to today's event, we already opened a space for questions on our Instagram page, which is at CLIL no Brasil. And we would like to start perhaps with one question from Instagram, and then we'll go to the questions that you are now writing on the chat. So the first question that we got, which was a very interesting question, I guess many teachers are concerned with the how to, right? So how do we do this? How do we get there? Clearly, Spain has made it work. And like Marisa said, there are many disenfranchised communities, and there's a very wide gap as well, right, Marisa, socioeconomically speaking. So, it's not like it's all flowers and pretty things and it's all wonderful in Spain. It's not. So how can CLIL work effectively in public schools was one of the questions sent to us via Instagram. So if either Erika or Marisa would like to answer this question, right? How can CLIL work effectively in public schools?
I can take that. So we have a huge problem here in terms of effective filter of students, not only for bilingual education, but for education in general, especially in the public sector. And these students have a special phobia for languages, for foreign language, for second language, and for Portuguese itself. They make jokes, I don't know how to say that. It's kind of, trying to protect themselves. They start, I don't know that. I will never get to know, to understand, to learn a second language, especially English. That's the lingua franca, the common, the general language. So I think that's an important thing. It's to work on the social emotional competencies, the effective filter, to make students believe that they are capable of learning through languages, not only, Portuguese, English, German, whatever, but they are capable of, that they can produce something. So the special attention I want to share here with you is on the social emotional competencies of these students. The second one is the importance of research, empirical data, as Marisa mentioned, so it's perfect, and the development of a short, medium, and long-term educational plan for bilingual education, if we understand that bilingual education in Brazil, it's a need and it's a right. We cannot simply deliver a plan. It's a start. It's something. We had nothing some months ago, but we have to develop an educational plan considering all this 20th century, this 21st century context that we are experiencing now. And this plan, or all the actions that teachers or the Ministry of Education decides to deliver, had to consider multiculturality in Brazil. We are not talking about only one student, the Brazilian students. We have many types, many different groups of Brazilian students. If we take one simple city, we will find different groups with different, culture, with different linguistic variation, different interests. If we are not talking about language instruction, we are talking about bilingual education, what means education through language. We have to consider the linguistic and the multicultural varieties of the country and of the cities, of the regions, especially.
If I could just add something also in answer to this initial question that you shared with us, Raul, I think in order to ensure that CLIL works, I believe it was in effectively in public schools, from our experience, in addition to what Erica has said, with which I fully concur. What we have found works beautifully here is, instead of moving from a bottom-up teacher-driven perspective, because this is CLIL programs can start out simply in a bottom-up way, and this is very flexible, but it's not as sustainable. We have found it's essential to receive a solid top-down push from the government, yeah, so that it's system adherent, and this makes programs be more continuous and structured. So that kind of push, which I think you guys might just be getting or starting to get through this curricular guidelines, is going to be essential, because it's going to set the basis for this kind of education to continue growing in the future. Secondly, it's essential, I think, to have in place a multi-tiered system of support. I was already alluding to that in my presentation. A support system which involves families who need to be informed about what bilingual education is and about realistic expectations about bilingual education. Support systems from multi-professional teams within the school, having social workers, special needs teachers, psychologists also available to confer with the language and content teachers. And of course, having the authorities support, for example, giving extra time to coordinate or extra support from language assistants, yeah? Or if possible, reduce the teacher-student ratios, which we have found is a huge issue for us here as well. Another crucial issue is teacher training, right? We need to invest in teacher training. This is absolutely essential. And in general, about CLIL and strategies to empower our teachers to teach all types of students, to cater for diversity within these programs. And I would also suggest, from our experience, start small. Yeah, don't go overwhelming yourselves with trying to do everything at the very beginning. This is trial and error. See what works, tweak it, fine tune it to perfection, and then scale it up. And the most important factor for the success of these programs is the teacher. And research has amply demonstrated this. The success of these programs, more than on any other variable, depends on the commitment and investment and motivation on the part of the teacher. It is incumbent upon us to bear the challenge of that change. And hey, we've never been daunted by challenges, so this is not going to be the first time, right? So let's march on. We're troopers. Let's march on, never losing that motivation.
Thank you both, Marisa and Erica, for your answers. I find very interesting that you've mentioned, some key points here. Governmental support, right? Of course, that's important. Also work with SES, right, Erica? Right, developing social emotional skills. That's absolutely very much very important. And I wanted to also just very briefly share something, because Marisa spoke about the multi-tiered support system, right, Marisa? I think that, again, this is where we can learn from international experiences. And even though the contexts are different, there's still things that we might want to look to and see, like, wow, this is really interesting. So in addition to the Adibe project, which Marisa has shared with you, and you can check out their website, Finland has a very interesting system in place, the 3-tier support system. If you have not heard about this, then that's definitely something, if you're interested in, you can do a little bit of research. It's called the 3-tier support system. And it works really, really well. It's actually one of the reasons why Finnish education works so well. We are already past the original time scheduled, but we do have a few questions from the audience, and our guests were wonderful, and they volunteered to stay an extra 5 minutes with us. So we're going to try to be selective here with the questions. There's one more question from Instagram that we will take, and then a question from the live chat here. So one of the questions we also received in advance that we would like to talk about is this. Nusaya asked, how can we motivate public school students to believe they can be bilingual, right? How do we get them to believe they can be bilingual? And that ties in with Erica's answer, right? Because Erica was talking about socio-emotional skills. So Marisa, would you like to take that question?
Absolutely. Okay, well, there's no easy answer to that question. Yeah, that's a real curveball right there. But I would say first, be realistic. If they expect to become perfectly balanced bilinguals, maybe they'll think this is too much of a challenge for them to undertake. Help them realize that through CLIL, we don't want them to, master English in the same way as Portuguese or Spanish. We simply want them to attain a functional language competence that's going to allow them to study and work and get by abroad and be successful citizens. Okay, so attuning expectations to reality will hopefully make it seem less overwhelming. Secondly, inform them of the many advantages that bilingual education has been proved to have, not only in terms of English level or our own L1 competence, which is not detrimentally impacted, or of the fact that they can learn the contents in exactly the same way as if they were doing it monolingually, but make them aware of the many cognitive advantages that CLIL has. There's a position paper that's been spearheaded by Professor March, just recently published, precisely on the cognitive advantages of the bilingual brain, which actually ties in with the soft skills that our students need to be successful citizens in the 21st century. CLIL promotes this. It helps them be more creative, to think outside the box, to solve problems, right? To be less distracted by unessential information. A lot of cognitive advantages that they need to be made aware of. And third, I think it's also very motivating to use the methodologies that are inherent in CLIL. CLIL favors student-centeredness, which is very different from the bulimic learning that we used in Spain, right? I don't know if you guys experienced this. We used to just, stand there and talk at our students and get them to memorize huge amounts of information, which they would regurgitate in an exam and then forget all about. CLIL does not promote that. We move from a teacher-driven to a student-centered scenario with project-based learning, task-based language teaching, cooperative learning, multiple intelligence theory, and all this is going to motivate students for sure. So the very implementation of CLIL is going to have a very motivating potential for the students. That would be my take, Raul.
Thank you, Marisa. And with that, I believe then we can move on to the next question. And now we'll take a question from the live audience. This is the question that we are going to answer. It has a little bit of an intro first. So one of the challenges of implementing CLIL in Brazil is that the students already suffer from poor education in other disciplines. How should we make sure that CLIL works well when students have problems in their own language, and etc.? So I'm assuming they were alluding to other problems, right, that students might face in the more disenfranchised settings here in Brazil. Erika, would you please take this question?
Sure. So I don't think Brazilian students have problems with their own language. Actually, I'm sure they don't have. The problem is how schools have been dealing with students' language for the past decades, for the past centuries maybe. We had only for many decades, for centuries, we had only one Portuguese, one formal Portuguese, one formal English being part of language of instruction, being instruction language at school. And we, as a country, ignored the other variations of language that students have. We ignored the interest of students. We have here not East Brazilian, we have so many poets, we have so many rich literature in São Paulo, we have so many different types of culture, but at school we had one single and elitist language, one single and elitist culture at schools. And that has been changing in the last years, especially after BNCC, that now states demands that the schools and the states, the cities, they bring students' culture, students' interest, students' language to the classroom. So the school has to make connections with students and teachers' reality and not the contrary. But we had the contrary situation in the last. So that's Brazilian history, educational history. So students don't have problems with their language. Their language is working, it's fine. I recommend you to if you don't, to read Marcos Banho. So it's about prejudice and language variation. Students can speak, students can understand, students have interests on literature, on cultural rap, repaint, and whatever we have here in Brazil. But schools have ignored that for decades. So this is changing, and bilingual education, it's another way to prove students that they are capable of many things. So let's take this chance, let's take this opportunity to show students again through BNCC, through this new document, this new guidelines in bilingual education, that their languages work fine and they can use this language in order to develop great things. I think that's the question.
Thank you so much, Erika. And I have to say, I really like, I mean, I love what you said, because definitely we have to think about what we mean when we say that, you know, students have language issues. What does that mean? What kind of language are we talking about? What is our expectation, you know, in regards to what kind of language, what kind of norm students have to learn? I also am just curious about one thing. So I would like to ask a question, and perhaps this could be our last question. Even though we have a couple others, which I'm afraid we won't have time to answer. So I would like to apologize for this to the audience. But Marisa, in your presentation, you mentioned that CLIL has a leveling effect, right? So thinking about what Erika has just said, thinking about that last question she answered, I'm curious, why does CLIL have a leveling effect? And how is it possible that CLIL has a leveling effect?
Well, that's a really interesting question, Raul. You know, in fact, it hasn't been explored as yet by hardcore quantitative research, like carrying out factor or discriminant analyses to isolate the variables that explain the leveler effect. But there's a really interesting study that has just been published. It's been spearheaded by Halbach at the University of Alcalá in Madrid. And what they've done is ask teachers their opinion about this. And there are basically three explanations, according to this research, for the leveler effect of CLIL. One is that the students who take part in bilingual programs are aware from the beginning that they're going to have to make an extra effort that their non-bilingual peers will not be making. So they have a greater responsibility and they're more committed. They're willing to put in that extra effort. And furthermore, they have this sense of like group belongingness, yeah, which is extremely positive. Secondly, parents across the board cannot help their children with homework to the same extent, right? Because it's in English. So this happens to everybody. And these children are becoming more autonomous in their learning, which is another factor that explains it. And third, teachers are also aware that they have to make sure the language is accessible. So they carry out a more language sensitive kind of teaching that makes learning more accessible to all. So those would be the three factors that have been identified thus far. But if anyone wants to go ahead and do a PhD, for example, on this issue, this would really be a great way to go. Just saying.
Thank you, Marisa. That really clarifies things for me. I think that just to wrap up, you know, we usually, I guess, I know that like we don't, the people who are here, the people who are watching don't think that, but perhaps the wider audience thinks that bilingual education just means that you go into a classroom and then you start speaking in another language and you just hope the kids learn, right? But that's not how it works. Like Marisa said, you know, we really have developed, we've come a long way. We've developed language sensitive methods, and through the implementation of these language sensitive methods, it's possible for any kid to learn anything. I think ultimately what we're trying to understand here really when we ask questions about whether bilingual education is possible in public schools is whether education is possible in public schools, because somehow I think that shows that we doubt, right, the possibility of learning in public schools. And then, you know, bilingual education is just that one extra challenge, that one extra a wall that we need somehow to, you know, climb and surpass. So I would like to thank both Marisa and Erika for your time today and for sharing all of your expertise with us. It's been wonderful. I would like to also end by saying that, you know, at least from a personal perspective, and I believe that Marisa and Erika would agree with me, yes, it is possible for bilingual education to be for everyone. But of course, like they mentioned, it takes time, right? There has to be, of course, support, right, from different sectors, from the government, from the community, from parents. You know, the students have to buy into this idea as well. And then we have to be patient when we're implementing bilingual education. We have to research our practices. We have to start small, right? And I think the important thing is to start from somewhere. The challenges will always exist, but if we start from somewhere, we can get somewhere as well, right? So thank you everyone for attending our second live stream of the series promoted by Clino Brasil. We will resume the series in January. And until then, a Merry Christmas, a Happy New Year to everyone. I hope everyone has a fantastic time with their loved ones this December. And we'll see you soon.